to. At 12 minutes 34, I blow your mind. At 13:48, I blow my own mind. And I can just do it like that.
Yes.
If I did that, I would have 3 likes after that. People would be unliking that shit immediately. Because I think the reason that they even stick around is because I don't bother them with any bullshit. And I have nothing to sell. I quite like that.
I think you'd have to make it extremely clear that you're doing it just as an experiment. But then again, wouldn't that poison the well of the experiment?
It might a little bit. I'd have to do it afterwards in retrospect. Yeah. Like satire, it can only admit itself afterwards. But by the way, just on your Hitler point, Godwin's law aside, which of course you have violated, well, you've proven and violated at the same time. I would slightly correct you, maybe, in the sense that I think Hitler was using the already dominant anti-Semitism that had existed for at least 700 years in Germany, and of course everywhere that they've ever been. It's called, of course, das Judenproblem, the Jewish problem, and that's of course a famous phrase. Then, unfortunately, turned into the final solution. That's why they called it that. And so I think that's what a demagogue does. They play on the the predominant inclinations of a society in order to gain favor where they might not otherwise. If you go to Berlin and you go to the museum it's called the Berlin City Museum, or the City of Berlin Museum, we discover a very interesting fact. It's the only fact that stuck with me out of the whole museum, actually. And that is that the first time we know that Jews existed in Berlin was in the 13th century. And the reason we know their existence is because they were listed in a law banning them from being sold cotton at markets, which means the very first mention of them is a negative one. But you are, of course, right. It works both ways. On one side, you can co-opt and borrow the particular hatreds or passions of an otherwise, at the time, very enlightened German folk, actually, and co-opt them into voting for you, so then you can abolish voting, which is what he did. And of course, at the same time, you can also then demand your own ideas be given a public voice in the hope that they then, of course, get support, which I think is the way around that we do it. We cannot be accused of being something popular. We can be accused of being advocates of something that is hopefully going to get popular, become phenomenally more popular than in any type of incarnation in the past. But we certainly don't run the risk of playing people's natural inclinations at the moment, because we actually list those inclinations as being a bit of a problem and as being the byproduct, in fact, of the society that we've inherited. So I think we inhabit an interesting area halfway between the chasm of public opinion and basic human needs, to put it in a slightly weird way.
Yeah, so what sort of thing do we need to to emphasize when it comes to how we address the effect that advertising and marketing has on our cultural psychology? I mean, where do you think that it's ultimately leading us? Do you think it's just to indoctrinate us into buying products, or do you think there's another effect in there that's intended?
Well, I mean, being the usual brilliant interviewer that you are, you've actually asked exactly the question that I was hoping you'd ask. I have 2 broad answers. The first one, actually your second part of your question, is there anything else that's at work within a particular campaign, or any particular campaign from a company to the general public? We know, of course, of the existence of one Edward L. Bernays. If anyone doesn't, just search Edward and Bernays. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. I think he was Austrian. No, he might have been German. I do apologize. I'm maybe wrong. Well, I'm obviously 50% wrong, having said both. But himself, of course, was Austrian. But he was the godfather of PR. He created PR, and with him very early on, it wasn't actually just about individual products. It was about understanding the way that you can build a consensus, a zeitgeist, and a zeitgeist that supports market doctrine. In fact, I'm going to punch up now Propaganda. This is the name of his book. The opening paragraph is very, very worth reading. Sorry about this. This should have been something that I have prepared for you.
That's cool.
Let's have a look. Page 1, quotes by Edward Bernays. Here we go. As usual, it proves to be good reads that has the most useful thing. Here we go. Propaganda quotes. Yeah. Here we go. This is from page 1, as far as I know. At least it's the one that I'm after. Conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Pause for laughter. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. So the answer to your question is actually absolutely. I think that even a random shoe advert wants you to be enamored with the particular idea of buying at all, because people talk about their own industry. They talk about the aggregated shoe sales in general as a measure of health of their own individual shoe sales. They compare where they are in the great shoe sale area, the various companies that do it. And as long as the entire industry is doing well, there's always room for you to do well. Beyond that, the general consumerist attitude is, of course, extremely important to any government because it is the big income. Well, it's not completely the big income. The big one is to be a debt slave, to have to be involved with the money process anyway. And it's no accident, by the way, that when we talk about the abolition of money and the idea of a post-market system availability society, an environment in which you are continually in something that is being updated and where direct and new learnings are being applied in the best possible ways to create strong, sustainable, healthy, life-enduring, systems and processes and educational resources. The reason we talk about the abolition of money is because, in a sense, the market system itself can't help but behave in the way that Bernays does in his opening to his book Propaganda. He can only ever see a democratic society as something that is the organized manipulation of individuals. He can only ever consider ethical conduct or a smoothly functioning society as being something that has been enforced. And it is that enforcing that is the problem. Now, we, of course, are promoting a worldview that we want to enforce as well. And, of course, we get called propaganda all the time. And in a way we are, because it's a set of in some senses, emotionally charged messages, but always about something that is to do with our latest learning. And we are quite happy to update our views when we can, and when we find out that we have been wrong about something. I've been pulled up a couple of times about things that I was incorrect about, and I'm very glad of it, and I make it very public. And I say, look, this is something I found out. This probably means that this part of my speech was wrong, although actually I think I've been quite lucky so far because I tend to spend about 3 months writing each thing that I do, and I always desperately look for sources and make sure those sources have sources and all the rest of it. But you can't catch everything. So I do think actually there is an accidental sometimes, but deliberate enforcement of a general value system behind any individual advertising.
Yeah, and one of the things that I just want to just go back to just for a second, the idea of the abolition of money. This is one thing that I personally have been going back and forth about because when we even say the phrase abolition of money or abolish money, it seems like it's like it implies some sort of forced removal of the monetary system. When one of the things that I try to emphasize to people as much as possible, that the Zeitgeist movement is not about the abolition of money, but rather about about encouraging people to create the conditions where money is made obsolete. So it's not necessarily about abolishing money, just simply outgrowing it. Because the analogy that I use is if you're because I stated this in one of my UK Collapse radio shows that imagine you're walking through conditions that is nigh on a blizzard, right? And you've got a big thick coat on that's just about keeping you warm, and you're heading home. You're nearly there, and you get home, and then and as soon as you step inside, you realise, oh, the central heating is on, or the log burner's on, and it's nice and warm and cosy. And what do? You take your coat off, not because you realise that the coat was bad from the get-go, or that you will never need the coat anymore. It's just the fact that you've worked towards the entering an environment where that coat is no longer needed, and that's really the emphasis that I try and put on.
That is put wisely and well, and you're absolutely right. We are limited by language when we want to describe one of our tenets being actually a result of our system rather than a precursor to it. It can't be possibly a precursor to a resource-based economy, as we call it, because the abolition of money overnight would cause untold disaster and death.
Absolutely.
Just like the abolition of energy would cause untold disaster and death. And just imagine hospitals without power. That's all I have to suggest to you. It's actually put surprisingly well by somebody who I don't agree with really very much. But a revolution is impossible without a revolutionary situation. It's something that Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov or Vladimir Lenin actually said. It's true, you can't just have a revolution. You have to have the situation that gives rise to it. And he's right about that, of course. A revolution for no reason is just an outburst of violence or of a drastic reordering for no good reason. We are in the situation where we feel the evolutionary pressure of our social system. We feel that prehensile toe growing, and we want to embrace it so that we can then, swing off the trees like the monkeys that we're turning into. Slightly poorly put, I think. It's something that came to me just now because I was talking about shoes. Did you ever listen to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yes. Yeah.
So you must be aware of the shoe event horizon. Yeah. Wonderful economic truth, so-called, turns out to be a falsehood, and it turns out to be an inevitability anyway. The idea that all industrialized nations essentially end up tending towards a purely shoe-orientated society, because when you're depressed, you look down and you see your shoes and you want to buy a new pair. And they have made more and more poorly and badly and at greater rapidity so they can meet the market demand, which means that people are decreasingly happy about the shoes and end up having a shoe war. It sort of reminds me of that because it's a brilliant economic lesson for the pure reason that it does talk about overconsumption. And it also talks about monoculture in a very roundabout way, that monoculture being shoes. And I recently re-listened to that part, and I smiled because it's so ridiculously well observed. So it is true, but you are actually completely right. We can outgrow the paradigm which requires tokens which are not related to anything. Even when they're related to gold, they're not related to anything real. Gold is just a thing that we found that we like. Yeah. It could equally be titanium. It could equally be anything. It's because gold was so useful during the gold times. We feel now and know now, in fact, from the ridiculously amazing technologies that come out every single day, that we can, if pushed, and if so inclined, reach a society where the coat of money can be taken off. That's probably the best analogy I know. Actually,
yeah, and just as a sort of humorous note, one of the things that I've found that the shoe industry fears most is a man in the vicinity of a shoe shop with a megaphone. As I found, when I included in my documentary, the guy. In the criticism section, there's a guy that was just calling me a pain. He actually ran a shoe shop that I was nearby when I was doing my megaphone in.
Well, you can tell him that his shoes are my pain. Yeah, no, I do enjoy that documentary, by the way. I would recommend it to your listeners and I'd recommend it in the following way. It's not a standalone documentary, and I don't think you built it to be one. It is a documentary, mostly for our membership, on what it's like to get out and do one of the most brave things. I don't do it. I don't get out with a megaphone. I find it terrifying. I think I probably wouldn't be very good at it. I live in the scripted world of well-prepared, or at least partially well-prepared lectures that I can hide behind. I find myself going off script. So it is a very useful insight for our members to see what it's like. And I do, the opening bit where you say that we'd like to apologize for ruining your lives and all that, I laughed loudly when I saw that. Because it's exactly the kind of thing that apology is well overdue from the media corporations and the news corporations. And it actually, there's a fairly decent show. It dies off very quickly, called The Newsroom, which begins in that very way, with a public apology by Jeff Daniels, playing a essentially Fox or CNBC news anchor, apologizing for dropping the ball over the last years, and we're not going to do it again, and we hope to win your trust back. It's exactly the kind of thing you would want to see.
Oh yeah, maybe, because I think I heard about that, because there was a video on YouTube that was it was mirrored God knows how many times, but I think the most common title for that is something like the most honest 3 minutes in mainstream TV or something like that, and it was where he was talking about the United States, and because there was this question and answer session, I think this was like from the first episode, and a freshman student asks him, can you explain why you think America is the greatest country in the world? And he goes off on this huge long rant, but then, ends the sort of rant tenderly about how America is definitely not the best country in the world, but it can be.
That's exactly right. It is the opening of the series, when they say, why is America the greatest country in the world? And he says, just what my other guys said, democracy and freedom, right? And he says, no, come on, why is it the best? And he interrupts and says, we're not the greatest country in the world, but we sure as hell used to be. And it is a wonderful piece. I actually first heard it on another podcast, and I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing until I realized it was unfortunately fictional. It was on the Peace Revolution podcast where they borrowed that. And they actually then top and tail it with the one I'm talking about, where they essentially issue a formal apology live on air. So it's good. It's written by Aaron Sorkin, who's a very, very good writer for 3 episodes, I find mostly. I'll cite another example of that, Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, which was the only other good Matthew Perry vehicle that's ever occurred since Friends, where they do a brilliant what it's like to be a behind-the-scenes, writer at essentially a Saturday Night Live type show, and it's very brilliant for 3 episodes, and then it gets awful. But I would recommend anybody watch those first 3 episodes of Studio 60, just for the sheer wit of it all and the sheer brilliance of Matthew Perry's acting, which, when directed correctly and when scripted well, is actually really quite good. It's an interesting thing, and as long as it gets someone to think a bit, it's all good, and gets them to think a little bit more critically.
Yeah, because I've noticed that there's that's one thing that I'm definitely drawn to in the kind of fiction that I would watch now, is the kind of fiction that has an allegorical content for the kind of systems of control and manipulation that we live in now. I mean, there's one presentation that I would recommend the listeners watch. It was by Mark Passio. He's from Philadelphia, and he has his own podcast show called What on Earth is Happening. But this presentation is called The Matrix Trilogy Decoded. And it's a 2-hour presentation, but he goes through the entire Matrix trilogy, and he basically points out and explores all the allegorical content. And it's just absolutely fantastic how real truths about the world that we live in can be snuck in to the writing of fiction, because really that seems to be the only kind of truth that we can absorb, if it's wrapped up in a fictional narrative.
It's very interesting you mentioned Mark Passio, because I've just discovered him myself. And I again come back to the Peace Revolution podcast. Their 26th or 28th of December podcast is 10 hours long, because it features a 5-hour seminar by Mark Passio, uncut. And it's really good. I mean, the guy talks about what natural law is. And just the introductory 15 minutes is absolutely fantastic. Where he says the usual things like, try not to pay attention to me. If I upset you, that might be because of the way that you have been conditioned. I am very declaratory. I won't change that, but get around that and listen to the information. And then he goes on and on and on. It's absolutely fantastic. Really, really good. I'd recommend anybody listen to it. He's a very, very good speaker.
The thing is, the really ironic thing, and I think you'll find this funny as well, is that when because I know the exact one that you're talking about, because it's in 3 parts, and he's so explanatory about so many things, and he's very clever in the fact that he repeats crucial things that are pivotal to understand, because the things that he talks about, there's a lot of multifaceted issues, and he goes into like the origins of certain words, and by exploring the origins of the words, it can derive their actual meaning. Like the word government actually just means mind control, because the word govern comes from governare, which means to control, and ment means mind. So really, it's just mind control. But the ironic thing is that when I started watching that, I basically took the laptop to the kitchen, so I could watch it while doing the washing up. And I think it was like 5 or 6 minutes in, and my mother walked past and she said, "He really likes the sound of his own voice, doesn't he?" And it was just highly ironic, because what he was talking about at the time is that, the messenger is irrelevant. It's the information itself, and that he's not here to get along with people or to make friends. His allegiance isn't, almost counterintuitively, his allegiance isn't to the audience. His allegiance is to the truth.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's always entertaining to look through the etymology of things. One of my favorite ones is, if progress is so good, what's Congress?
Oh yeah.
The other one as well is you can divide politics up falsely. You can say, poly means a multitude of, and ticks are blood-sucking parasites.
Yeah.
Right. You can do the same with auditorium. So Audi, I hear, and torium, the bull. I hear the bull. It's of course incorrect. I'm not offering real etymology here, but one can have a lot of fun with words, because it's such a flawed system that we have that we speak with.
Oh yeah, because the English language, it drew its influence in etymology from multiple different languages, so anything can be construed as anything else. That's what. One of the things that really irritates me about the English language is how we can have spellings that are completely counterintuitive. Like, it took me, I think I learned by the age of 7. Oh yeah, it took me until I was about 7 to actually learn that the word Peugeot was not pronounced Peugeot.
Yeah. Of course, that's a French word, and I had many years ago, I had a girlfriend who had gone to an international school, and they'd essentially been taught that English was the English language is the dustbin of all languages. It's true. It's why we have more than 1 million words. Who uses the 1 million words? If you started saying those words, you wouldn't be done for years. 1 a second. So yeah, it's true. It's a very, very bizarre language. It's one that you notice children make very amusing and cute grammatical mistakes, and they do because they're actually being logical, but they're incorrect because we've decided that the word, is is different in the past, or if it's fight, it's not fighted, it's fought. But when they say fighted, they're actually being logically correct. It's like they're applying the pattern that they've seen, but that pattern never took hold when it came to the way that we spoke.
Yeah.
The one that always gets me as well is homophones, words that look exactly the same, but sound completely different and mean different things. For example, can you explain the difference between wind and wind, or refuse and refuse? There are whole poems dedicated to the ridiculousness of our language with its multitude of words, which actually mean that you can't sometimes understand the sentence unless you really understand English. It's crazy.
Yeah, because the context has to be understood first off.
That's right.
Yeah. But, what was I going to say? I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. Anyway, you carry on.
The best of us. But anyway, moving away from language briefly, let's see, I've actually gone blank as well.
Oh no, we're both trapped.
It's all right, it's okay. But yeah, it's been rather interesting. Tell me, have you been out on your megaphone again recently?
I think the last time I went out on the megaphone was, I think it was probably September, and even then that was only because I was specifically filming the what I call the rotating megaphone footage, where one of my friends was actually walking around me in circles while I was saying things on the megaphone. But no, I mean, I've been so busy with I was so busy with the documentary, I hadn't got out on the megaphone, but I will be getting out soon, and almost by synchronicity, I can tell you that this morning I got my new megaphone through the post. Because I once took my megaphone to I think it was a squatting march in Brighton, and halfway through the march, I basically lent out my megaphone for other people to use. But halfway through the march, it started tipping it down. So my megaphone got a little bit drenched, and now it starts cutting out after about 45 minutes to an hour. So that's why when I went to the Million Mask March in November, I started using my megaphone a couple of times, and then loads of people started coming up to me asking me if they to say something over the megaphone. And by the time I got my megaphone back, the batteries, I thought the batteries were dead, but the megaphone was just dying, so I had to get a new one. But I will be out on the megaphone sometime soon.
Excellent. How have you found the response of the general public? Is there a pattern?
It kind of depends, really. I mean, it depends on the time of day, the weather condition. There's so many different interrelating factors, but in general, most of the people walk past without saying anything. Some of them just completely blank me. Some people just they establish eye contact and they give me a little nod or a wink to say, as if to silently say, yes, I approve of what you're doing, but I either don't have the time or maybe the bravery to come up to you and say well done and shake my hand or whatever. But every now and then I do have people come up to me and start engaging me in a conversation, and generally when I do that, I'm normally talking to people for about an hour because there's so much to be said. But yeah, I generally find that because when I first started, because I've explained all this in my documentary, but just for the sake of this podcast, when I first started, I was just flooding out information, just going on and on for 10 minutes straight, explaining how the banking system works, how the political system works, and all that sort of stuff. But in recent years, I've limited myself to shotgun statements and satirical comments, and just leaving plenty of gaps, so that if anyone wants to actually come up to talk to me or give me a hug, because I've got the free hug sign in my other hand anyway, then they've got the opportunity